Imagine a normal day, busy work, calls, orders. A black courier walks in, but instead of a respectful attitude, there is ridicule, humiliation, jokes that cut the ear. They laugh, not realizing who stands before them. They don't suspect that this man is their boss, the real owner. How will their arrogance end? A twist awaits you that they will definitely not forget. Friends, before we go any further, write in the comments what your name is and what city you're watching us from. We love to know who you are because each of you is a part of our channel. You inspire us to create these stories, develop our project, and move forward. Every word you say, every like and comment helps us grow and share such incredible stories. We incredibly appreciate you. You are our main strength and motivation. The day was gray and rainy. A black courier, dressed in a modest uniform, with a soaked hood on his head, walked slowly toward the high glass facade of a luxurious restaurant. It was a premium establishment where only the richest customers of the city got in. The large golden letters above the entrance literally shouted status, and the perfect glass doors reflected the people passing by. With a faint hope of professionalism, the courier pushed open the heavy door. Inside, everything shone. Marble floor, sparkling chandeliers, exquisite interior details. But instead of the warm welcome he expected, he was met with icy stares. Behind the reception desk stood a young woman with impeccably styled hair. Her eyes narrowed as soon as she saw him. Her gaze from head to toe was piercingly studying, contemptuous. Her smile, which had just brightened for the previous guest, instantly disappeared. "Did you want something?" she asked, emphatically cold, as if his presence offended the very air in the room. The courier, trying to ignore the tension in her voice, politely explained that he was delivering an important order. The girl slowly raised the phone to her ear, not bothering to answer or be polite. Behind her, two waiters, a man and a woman, were whispering. Their glances were furtive but eloquent. The woman giggled quietly, covering her mouth with her hand, and the man leaned over the counter and whispered something in her ear. The courier heard it. What, another one of them? Like they can afford to be customers here. The giggling intensified. Courier felt the blood pounding in his temples, but he remained silent, not letting his emotions take over. He knew that scenes like this were not uncommon. All he had to do was do his job and leave. The waitress, who had decided that this was the entertainment of the day, came closer, her heels clacking loudly on the marble floor. With her arms folded across her chest, she asked in a deliberately sweet voice, "You must have gotten the wrong door. We have a service entrance in the back for deliveries. Why would you come in here? This is a place for, not for people like you." The words penetrated like daggers, but the courier remained silent. He was used to it, but each time the wound grew deeper. At that moment, however, he looked up, confident, unwavering. That look made the waitress take a step back. He calmly held out the tablet with the order and said the customer's name. The girl at the front desk reluctantly took the device, for a moment taken aback by the confidence in his voice. But when she recovered, she rolled her eyes and said sharply, "Wait here." Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the waiters behind his back continued to laugh. "Should we offer him another table?" snorted the waiter. "I wonder what the guests would say if they saw him among them." The courier exhaled. He knew it was only going to get worse ahead. But what the staff didn't know was that their whole world was about to collapse. The courier waited. The moments stretched like an eternity, and the cold stares of the waiters burned into his back. Their snickering continued, but now another man in a chef's uniform joined them. Tall, heavy, and commanding, he gave the delivery man a look that was hard to mistake for anything other than contempt. "What's it doing here?" the chef asked loudly, not even trying to hide his displeasure. "This entrance is for guests, or do you think you're one of them?" The courier, remaining calm, politely explained that he was delivering the order, but instead of hearing him, the chef laughed loudly. "Delivery? Here, through the front door? Do you even know where you belong?" His voice echoed around the room, drawing the attention of several other employees. "Back door for the likes of you. Or did you think you could walk on marble? You're even leaving footprints here." The courier looked down. There were indeed his shoe prints on the wet floor. He tried to say something, but the chef interrupted him by raising his hand as if to call for silence. "Look, kid," he began with a wry smile, "if you wanted to feel human, this isn't the place. Here, people like you are only tolerated outside the kitchen, so go where you belong." By now, a small crowd of staff had gathered around. Some pretended to be busy, but were clearly enjoying the spectacle. The waitress who had spoken to him earlier picked up on it. Maybe he just doesn't realize where he is. Next time, he'll probably think of sitting at a table with customers. Can you imagine? The crowd laughed, and the courier felt his fingers clench into fists from humiliation. He reminded himself why he was here and exhaled slowly to calm himself. "I just need to give the order to a customer," he said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "It's an important order." "Order!" the chef repeated loudly, as if it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. "Do you think any of our customers are going to talk to you? They wouldn't even look at someone like you. Go on, go out the back. No one will notice your boxes down there." The courier remained silent as the laughter died down around him. He was about to leave to find another way out when another employee approached him, a young guy, apparently from the security service. The guy took a quick glance at the courier, grinned, and said with all the insolence he could muster, "You're only here because we have a tolerance policy. But don't mistake that for an invitation to come in here. So come on, move before the guests complain." The tension in the air became almost palpable. The courier could feel how these people literally enjoyed their power. Their every gesture, every word was aimed at making him feel less than human. And yet, in spite of all this, he stood still. His silence, his calmness, his steadfastness were beginning to alarm the crowd. People were used to seeing their victims break, apologize, walk away. But this man didn't even flinch. He raised his head, looked directly into the chef's eyes, then shifted his gaze to the others. His voice was quiet but confident. "I'm not here to listen to you. I'm here to do my job." This phrase, spoken in a steady voice, silenced everyone. For a moment, the room fell into a tense silence that could have been cut with a knife. But none of them had any idea that their worst nightmare had already begun. When the courier turned away to check the tablet with the order details, the whispers behind his back turned into open, unrestrained laughter. The staff was no longer trying to hide their attitude. They were enjoying the moment. The waiter, brushing an invisible dust from the sleeve of his perfectly pressed uniform, leaned lazily on the counter and addressed his colleagues loudly. "Hey, have you seen his shoes? They look like they're from some store for, poor neighborhoods. Maybe he picked them out on purpose so he wouldn't come in here." The crowd erupted in laughter. A waitress standing nearby picked up on it. "And his jacket? It looked like it had been through a hurricane, though—" She paused, pretending to be thoughtful. "Maybe he lives in it. On the street?" New waves of laughter rolled through the hall. The courier, with his back to them, pretended not to hear. He continued to study the clipboard, though his hands were trembling slightly from exertion. The chef, who was watching all this from the sidelines, decided to add his own joke. Crossing his arms over his chest, he said loudly for all to hear, "Come on, guys, don't be so hard on him. Maybe he has a big dream. To work here, wash our dishes. We're kind enough to give him a chance. Just make sure he learns to talk properly first. His accent's a real pain in the ass." These words caused a new burst of laughter. The waiter, choking with laughter, literally bent in half. "Come on, Chief. He doesn't even know how to talk. He should at least learn how to say hello like a human being. Maybe next time they'll let him in the front door." The waitress stepped forward, tapping her heels loudly, as if trying to draw attention to her next joke. She put her palm to her forehead, pretending to scrutinize the messenger. "You know, maybe we're laughing for nothing. Maybe he came here to hide, from the police. They like to moonlight as delivery boys. It's convenient, you get the money and no one will know who you really are." The crowd laughed again, louder. Some of the employees, as they passed by, cast frankly squeamish glances, as if they were afraid that the courier's presence would spoil their ideal environment. One of them, a young guy with a shiny watch, deliberately bumped into the courier's shoulder as he walked by. It was clearly done on purpose. The guy didn't even turn around, just tossed it over his shoulder. "Careful, or I'll have to call the cleaners. These marks are hard to clean up." It was getting harder and harder to restrain himself, but the courier remained silent. He straightened his shoulders, raised his head, and looked calmly at the chef. He caught his gaze and frowned. "What? Did you have something to say, or do you want instructions on how to get out the back door?" The crowd fell silent, waiting for a response, but the delivery man again said nothing. Instead, he turned back to the clipboard, checking the name of the customer for whom the order was intended. His confidence was beginning to embarrass some of the employees, but the rest continued to scoff. The waitress suddenly clapped her hands loudly, drawing attention to herself. "Hey, maybe we're wasting our time. Let's just give him a broom and show him how to sweep our floor. So he doesn't come here for nothing." The courier stood still for a moment, but then slowly raised his head and, without looking at either of them, said confidently, "I'm waiting for a client." His voice sounded firm, without a hint of confusion. This tone alerted the crowd. There was silence for a moment, but it was broken again by the chef, who said with a sneering grin, Well, he's waiting. Let's see how long he can stand there like a statue." The staff, as if on cue, started giggling again, but a faint tinge of uncertainty began to slip into their laughter. Why doesn't he leave? Why doesn't he respond to their taunts? They didn't yet know that all this was just the beginning of their humiliation. The courier stood in the middle of the hall, holding a clipboard with the order, but instead of getting any help, he faced an icy wall of ignoring. The girl at the front desk returned, but didn't even bother to meet his gaze. She sighed loudly so that everyone could hear, as if to show that this man was taking up her precious time. "What are you still doing here?" she threw, taking her eyes off the phone. "I told you to wait. Do you realize this is no place for you to be messing around?" The courier politely reminded that the customer was waiting for his order. He just needed to know where to find the addressee. The girl rolled her eyes irritably. "A client? What client? Do you even know who we're having lunch with? I doubt any of them would be talking to—" She paused, looking at him upside down. "Well, someone like you." A chef walking by stopped, picking up on her mood. "Look, man, Maybe the customer just changed his mind. Who would want to get an order from, well, just leave the box and get out. Nobody here wants to do business with you." The courier again patiently explained that he had to deliver the order in person, but his words provoked a new attack of irritation. "Oh my God," the waitress snorted, hanging the tray on the counter. "Do you even hear what you're being told? No one's interested in what you're doing here. We weren't hired to take care of your problems. Seems to me you're just here to play the important man." The crowd around them started laughing again, and the girl behind the counter frowned feignedly. "Can you even read?" she asked, pointing to the clipboard in his hands. "Instead of standing here staring at us, why don't you find the address yourself? Or is that too complicated for you?" The courier squeezed the clipboard harder, but remained calm. He repeated again that he needed help. His request sounded calm and confident, but that only made the staff angrier. "Where did you get the nerve?" The chef intervened again, coming closer. "You're begging to be spoken to like a human being. But here's the problem. This isn't a dump, and you've obviously got the wrong address." His words were met with chuckles, but someone in the crowd added loudly and angrily, "Maybe he's just used to having everything handed to him on a platter, like a victim of the system. Probably thinks if he stays here longer, we'll tip him." The waiter, grinning, stepped closer and defiantly took a few steps around the courier, scrutinizing him as if he were a museum piece. "Look, you look like you just got out of prison, and here you are walking around with people. It's a wonder you can even hold a tablet. How have you not dropped it yet?" The crowd erupted into laughter again. The girl behind the counter finally clapped her hands pretentiously. "All right, enough with the circus. Let's send him somewhere. How about the back room? Let him wait there until we're done with the real clients." But the courier didn't move. His steadfastness was beginning to worry the staff. A shadow of doubt flickered in the eyes of some of them, but no one dared to show it. The tension was becoming palpable, but instead of helping, the chef decided to add fuel to the fire. "Are you still here?" he threw. "I'm beginning to think you just want to see how real people work. You might need to memorize it for the rest of your life. I don't think so." The courier took a deep breath. All he had to do was wait. But his silence was an even greater challenge to the staff. They didn't know that their pompous words and contempt were just the calm before the storm that would overwhelm them. The courier was still standing in the hall, holding the box with the order tightly. His calmness was beginning to irritate the employees. They were used to their taunts and humiliations making the victim break down, but this man remained steadfast. The atmosphere became increasingly tense until one of the waiters, a young guy with a cocky expression, decided to take matters into his own hands. "Well, guys, it's time to have a little fun," he announced, clapping his hands loudly. "Our guest is too serious." The waiter came closer, pretending to help. His face was flushed with a feigned politeness, and a sneer glinted in his eyes. He held out his hands for the box. "Here, let me help you. I see it's a little heavy for you. Or can you do it on your own?" "I don't think so." Before the courier could say anything, the waiter accidentally pushed the box. It slipped out of the courier's hands and fell to the floor with a thud. The food inside was clearly damaged. Boxes of sauces spilled, the contents spilled out. The air was filled with the odors of a spoiled order. "Oh," the waiter pretended to exclaim, theatrically clasping his hands to his face. "I'm sorry, buddy. I guess it was too hard for you, but that's okay. You're used to picking things up, aren't you?" The crowd of employees watching this scene broke into loud laughter. Some even began to applaud as if it was a successful performance. "Come on, show me how you do it," the other waiter said, bending down to get a better look. "On your knees, boy. Prove you can do something right." The courier slowly knelt down to pick up the scattered packages. His face remained calm, but inside he was seething. He could feel every look, every sarcastic sneer directed in his direction. He wanted to respond, wanted to show these people their place, but he knew the moment had not yet come. "Look how hard he's trying," the waitress said wryly, covering her mouth with her hand to stifle a laugh. "It's just a picture of the day. Maybe we should give him a broom. It looks so organic on the floor." The chef stepped closer, arms crossed over his chest. His lips curved into a contemptuous grin. "You really think you can deliver that order? After you screwed it up?" he asked with a sneer. "If I were the customer, I'd throw you out with the trash." The courier, without looking up, gathered the last pieces of packaging and neatly stacked everything in the box. He rose to his feet, wiping his hands on his pants, and looked directly at the chef. His gaze was calm, but there was an unwavering confidence in it. It made the chef hesitate for a moment, but he quickly regained his contrived superiority. "What? You have something to say?" he asked, leaning closer. "Are you here to work, or are you just playing the victim?" The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone shouted from behind, "Maybe we should send him into the kitchen. Let him show you how to mop the floors." "Or in the back," the waitress said. "At least there no one would see him messing up." The courier took a deep breath and said quietly, "My job is to deliver the order. I'll do it." His calm voice broke the noise, causing a second of confusion among the staff. But the moment of calm was quickly replaced by more ridicule. They didn't realize that at this moment the balance of power was changing before their eyes. They laughed, not knowing that each of them would soon regret their words and actions. The courier stood holding a soiled box, his uniform stained with spilled sauce. He tried not to look at the staff around him, who literally radiated pleasure at his superiority. There was an atmosphere of tense anticipation in the room. They were waiting for him to make excuses, apologize, or perhaps finally leave, admitting his place. But he wouldn't leave. His silence irritated them even more. "Did you hear what I said?" the chef said loudly, coming in close. "You're not supposed to be here. This is a place for people, not for—" He paused, looking the courier straight in the eye with obvious mockery. "Well, you know who it's for." The crowd of employees behind him burst into laughter. The waitress, who had previously only nodded in agreement, stepped forward resolutely. Her voice was sweet but filled with venom. "Look, you're used to this kind of work, right? You know, picking up after other people, delivering stuff. It's probably the best thing for you. 'Cause anywhere else, they wouldn't let you anywhere near it." Her words caused a new fit of laughter. The young waiter, still reeling from his performance with the box, decided to add, "Or maybe you're not a delivery boy at all. Maybe you just wandered in here to get a feel for how normal people live. It's interesting, isn't it? But don't get your hopes up. You don't fit in here." The waitress grinned and circled him with her gaze. "Oh, come on, look at his shoes. Those shoes are older than this restaurant. He can't even walk in them without leaving marks. Dirt, like him, is always visible." Laughter swept through the crowd again. The courier remained silent, but inside him everything was boiling. He gripped the box tighter, feeling his fingers trembling with tension, but he didn't want to show his weakness. "Don't you know how to talk?" the chef asked sharply, leaning closer. His face was angry and contemptuous. Or is your job just to stand there and keep quiet? You know, it's a good thing, though. It's better not to talk to people like you at all. Someone in the crowd added, "He probably thinks he's too important to answer to us, like, 'Look how cool I am delivering food for the rich.' Well, I'm sorry, kid, you're nothing more than a walking shadow." The waiter, obviously sensing the support of his colleagues, dared to do more. He came closer and, standing face to face with the courier, asked, "What do you know how to do, huh? Do you have any skills at all? Or have you spent your whole life carrying other people's stuff?" "Come on," the waitress interrupted, waving her hand theatrically. "For him, it's the limit of dreams. Look how proudly he holds his box. It's as if inside it is his hope for a better life." The crowd laughed. Some began to applaud, inciting each other. The courier felt the heat in his face. He wanted to answer, but he knew it would only make things worse. The chef once again said loudly, "Maybe we should hire him here. You know, to clean up after normal people. Although, to be honest, he probably wouldn't even be good for that. I mean, we don't want our customers to see that kind of thing." The crowd erupted into particularly loud laughter. One of the waiters defiantly stepped forward and threw a towel on the floor for the delivery man. "Are you going to start? Wiping the floor, I mean. That's all you know how to do anyway." The courier looked at them in silence. He saw in their faces not only cruelty, but also weakness, hidden behind contrived insolence. They didn't know who he really was. They didn't know that their words would soon turn against them. But for now, he stood and waited. His time had not yet come. The crowd around the courier was no longer hiding its pleasure. Each new comment became harsher and more humiliating. The employees, as if fueled by the general atmosphere, were competing to see who could hurt the uninvited guest more. But all this was just a prelude to what would happen next. The chef, already tired of the messenger's silence, stepped up close to him as if purposely violating his personal space. "Do you think that by silence you will impress us?" he asked, leaning in so close that the courier could feel his hot breath. "You know, it's kind of funny. It's always the same with guys like you. Ostentatious patience while there's seething with anger inside. But I'll tell you, kid, nobody here is going to feel sorry for you." The crowd murmured approvingly. The waitress, who had been chuckling on the sidelines, stepped forward and said loudly, "What the hell do you think you're doing? You think because you came in here with that box of yours, we should get down on our knees to you? It's the only way to deal with people like you. And we know why you're in this job. Certainly not because you're smart." The crowd laughed, but at that moment, another waiter decided to go farther. It was a young guy, too cocky for his age. He slowly walked around the delivery man as if sizing him up. There was something particularly evil in his eyes. "Listen, where are you from?" he asked mockingly, stretching the words out deliberately. "Well, I mean, where did you come from? From the look of you, you probably don't even have roads. Just dirt and hovels. Or maybe you're one of those people who's always whining about being unlucky. Like, oh, life's so unfair. Yeah, well, life is unfair, but only to those who are worthless." The courier was silent, his gaze remaining focused, but the words still penetrated, leaving painful traces. The guy didn't stop. He started louder on purpose so that everyone around him could hear. "You know what pisses me off the most? People like you come here and think they can live among us like normal people. But here's the truth. You'll never be one of us. Because all you can do is carry boxes. That's your ceiling." Some of the staff chuckled, but some of them were already starting to look slightly embarrassed at what was happening. However, the young waiter didn't notice it. He was too engrossed in his role. "Is your family the same?" he added with a venomous chuckle. "The same? Mediocre? Let me guess. None of them have accomplished anything, just living on handouts, huh? I guess your mommy wanted you to be something too, and you ended up here hauling food for real people." These words caused an explosion of laughter among most of the staff, but there were shadows of doubt on some faces. The boundary of what was acceptable had clearly been breached. The courier tensed slightly, but still remained silent. His eyes looked coldly at the young waiter, who, inspired by his victory, continued. "Why don't you send them a picture? Show them you're in a place like this. Although, they probably won't even realize how much cooler this place is than all your dreams." The chef, who was watching this, grinned. "All right, that's enough. You've already wrecked it." Though, he thought, tilting his head to the side, maybe that's a lesson to him. Let him know that even here among normal people, he'd be at the bottom. The waitress decided to add, "What's the lesson?" He already knows his place. He just won't admit it. People like him are always trying to look proud when it's obvious to everyone that they're nothing. These words finally escalated the atmosphere. Some of the employees who had been silent until then tried to change the subject, but their voices were drowned in laughter and insults. The courier, who had been like a rock before, suddenly straightened up. He looked at the young waiter, who was literally jubilant at his victory. And although the courier didn't say a word, his gaze was so cold and calm that it silenced the boy. Suddenly, silence enveloped the hall. It was not the silence the crowd had been waiting for, nor was it the silence the courier had been keeping all this time. It was the silence behind which the storm was hiding. No one knew yet that their rigor had reached its peak, and now only they would have to face the consequences. The laughter of the employees began to subside, turning into a lazy hum, but the atmosphere was still heated. The courier stood motionless, clutching the box with the soiled order. There was not a single emotion on his face, which irritated the staff even more. Their anger was fueled by the fact that, despite all the humiliation, he did not break down, did not apologize, and did not respond to their outbursts. The chef, sensing that his position as the leader of the crowd might be shaken, stepped forward. He frowned and asked rudely, "You think standing there like a statue is going to change our minds? You're nothing. You're just a delivery boy, and frankly, you're not even doing a very good job of it." The waitress, who was standing nearby, did not miss the opportunity to add fuel to the fire. "Look at him. He probably thinks he's special, like, I deliver at a restaurant like this. But you know what? You're just a dirty stain on our clean picture. You always will be." The crowd laughed approvingly. One of the employees, who had not interfered before, suddenly came closer and, leaning on the counter, sarcastically threw, "Maybe you want us to applaud you for finding your way here. That's quite an accomplishment for someone like you." The courier, ignoring the taunts, calmly placed the box on the counter. His movement was so calm and confident that it caused a second of confusion. He wiped his hands on his pants, straightened up, and looked directly at the chef. "I want the owner," he said in a steady, cold voice. These words caused a wave of surprise. The staff froze for a moment, and then there was loud, caustic laughter. The chef, smiling broadly, shook his head theatrically. "The owner? Are you serious?" He pointed a finger at the courier. "You think he's going to waste his time on you? Look, kid, he won't even look in your direction." The waitress covered her mouth with her palm and grinned. Maybe he wants to complain. Like, I tried so hard, but everyone else is bad. How many seconds do you think he'll spend on you before he kicks you out? The young waiter stepped closer again and folded his arms across his chest defiantly. The owner. Why? Do you want to ask for a raise? Or maybe complain about us? You know what? He leaned closer. People like you will never get anything more. Your job is to carry boxes and keep quiet. The courier looked at him again, and there was something in his gaze that made the boy straighten up sharply and take a step back. It wasn't defiance, not aggression, but something much worse, a quiet confidence. I want the owner, the courier repeated without raising his voice. The chef laughed, but his laugh sounded less confident. His voice was a little louder, as if he were trying to assert his superiority. Look, you're in a territory where people like you shouldn't even exist. I'll tell you one thing, the owner won't waste a second on you, because you're nothing to him. Absolutely nothing. You're not even worth this restaurant, you know? The waitress decided to pick up on it to enhance the effect. He's probably never met anyone who's actually accomplished anything in his life. This restaurant must be like a palace to him, except he'll always be on his knees here. These words again caused laughter among the staff, but it sounded increasingly strained. The courier did not take his eyes off the chef. His silence had become something unusual to them. It was pressing. There was a challenge in that silence that they could not understand. Don't you get it? The chef threw in irritation. We're in charge here, and people like you are just doing our job. You want to talk to the owner. He won't even remember your face once you're gone. But instead of answering, the courier, without looking at the others, took a step toward the counter and said firmly, Get the owner. His voice sounded so calm that everyone suddenly fell silent. This silence broke the usual noise of ridicule and sarcastic comments. One of the employees, sensing that the situation was getting out of control, coughed awkwardly. The chef, sensing that he was losing his grip on the crowd, moved even closer and spoke louder. You don't realize where you've come. You think you can make demands here? You're just a courier, nothing more. The courier raised his head, his gaze burning the chef. Get the owner. Now. The words sounded like a sentence. Though the staff was still trying to remain confident, a sense of unease hung in the air. The courier no longer looked confused or humiliated. His calmness was beginning to frighten them. They did not yet know that this scene would be the beginning of their humiliation. The silence in the hall became almost palpable. The staff, who a moment ago had been openly mocking and jeering, now froze, watching the courier. His calmness, his firm voice, and the confidence in his every move began to shatter their illusion of superiority. But the chef, still confident in his power, snorted contemptuously and took a step forward. "Didn't you hear that?" he said harshly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Get out of here before I call security. None of us are going to call the owner for you." The courier said nothing. He walked slowly but confidently around the reception desk, ignoring the indignant cries of the staff. His movements were so calm that it made them even more uncomfortable. "Hey, where are you going?" shrieked the girl at the front desk, her voice high and panicked. "You can't just walk in there." The chef, blushing with anger, tried to intercept the messenger. "Are you out of your mind?" he shouted. "You think you can just walk in? This is private property. We'll call the police." But the courier did not stop. He strode confidently towards the door labeled Manager. His footsteps echoed in the marble hall where the frozen employees still stood. The waiters looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. As he reached the door, the girl at the front desk, gathering all her courage, ran forward and tried to block his path. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking with nervous tension. "You have no right to go in there. The manager's busy, and he certainly won't talk to someone like you." The courier stopped for a moment and looked at her. His gaze was cold, calm, but so penetrating that the girl involuntarily stepped back. Then he calmly opened the door and entered. The staff, stunned by his act, remained standing in utter bewilderment. One of the waiters muttered, "Is he out of his mind? He's going to get thrown out of there." The chef, flushed with anger, took a step toward the door, about to burst in after him, but something in his mind made him stop. Something in this man's behavior made him question his usual worldview. There was silence in the manager's office, which was furnished with exquisite luxury. The manager, an elderly man with gray hair, looked up from his papers, surprised to see the courier enter. "Excuse me, but who are you?" he asked, clearly puzzled as to why the delivery man was in his office unannounced. The courier walked silently to the desk, opened the briefcase that had been with him all this time, and took out some documents. He placed them carefully on the table in front of the manager and said in a steady voice, "My name is James Wilson. I own this restaurant." The manager froze, his eyes widening in surprise. He slowly took the papers and studied them, his face growing tenser with each passing second. They were official papers, confirming that James was indeed the sole owner of the place. It was all perfectly laid out. Is that true?" the manager muttered, raising his eyes to the messenger. "I didn't know anything." James nodded briefly and said, "I think your employees have forgotten who hired them and who they serve." The manager turned pale, nervously adjusting his tie. He already realized that the whole situation was getting out of hand. He knew that in this conversation he was not the master of the situation. Meanwhile, outside the office door, the staff began to stir. The chef paced back and forth irritably, making sarcastic comments. "So, how long is he going to be in there? He's hoping the manager will listen to him. He's going to get kicked out, and we're going to deal with him." But the door opened suddenly, and the manager came out of the office. His face was pale, and he was clearly nervous. The staff froze as James followed him out. "Gather everyone," James said quietly but confidently, looking directly at the chef. "What?" he mumbled, uncomprehending. "What did you say?" "All of them. Now, in the audience." James's voice was cold and commanding. It was not the voice of a messenger, not the voice of a servant. It was the voice of a man who was used to command. The staff began to glance around, but no one dared to disobey. They didn't know what awaited them yet, but fear had already settled in their hearts. The staff stood in the main hall of the restaurant, gathered in an awkward semicircle. No one fully understood what was going on, but the tension in the air was so thick that it felt like you could touch it with your hands. The chef, who had recently been the epitome of insolence and arrogance, now looked confused. His face was twisted with irritation and bewilderment. The rest of the staff shuffled from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact. James Wilson entered the room, no longer holding a soiled box or looking like a humble courier. He was now the embodiment of confidence and dignity. His calmness, which had previously annoyed the staff, now struck fear in them. The manager followed him, looking confused and frightened. James stopped in the center of the room and looked around at all the employees. His eyes lingered on the chef, the waitress, the young waiter, and the receptionist, who had been the most vocal participants in the mockery and humiliation a few minutes ago. "At first, I just wanted to deliver the order," he began, his voice low but harsh like the blows of a hammer. "To do my job, but instead of professionalism and respect, I was met with bias, cruelty, and racism." The words caused everyone to glance around nervously. The young waiter tried to mumble something, but James raised his hand, calling for silence. "I've been watching," he continued. "I've watched how you treat someone you consider beneath you. I've seen how easily you overstep your bounds, insult, humiliate. But you know the best part. You didn't know who I was." He paused, letting those words settle. The staff now froze completely. One of the waiters swallowed nervously, and the girl at the front desk bit her lip, trying to hide her embarrassment. "My name is James Wilson." His voice was hard as steel. "And I am the sole owner of this restaurant." These words hit the staff like a thunderclap. Some of them gasped. The chef turned pale, and the waitress covered her mouth with her hand, as if she were afraid to show her emotions. The young waiter took a step back, his face gray with realization. "It's impossible." The chef exhaled, but immediately stopped talking when he saw the look in James's eyes. James pulled some papers out of his pocket and handed them to the manager. "Show them. Let them see for themselves." The manager silently unfolded the papers and showed them to the staff. Signatures, stamps, everything said that the owner of the restaurant was really standing in front of them. It was the end of their illusions. James took a step forward, looking intently at each of the employees. "Today, I saw how you present this restaurant, how you treat people. And I'll be honest with you, I'm disappointed in you. Your behavior is unacceptable. The way you treat another human being is disgusting." His voice was full of power, but there was no shouting in it. It made every word even more painful. "I gave you a chance to prove yourselves," he continued. "But instead of professionalism and respect, I saw contempt and cruelty. And now you must answer for it." The chef turned pale, took a step forward. "Sir, I didn't know. We didn't know who you were." His voice was shaky. "It was all just a misunderstanding." James raised his hand, interrupting him. "You didn't know who I was? And if you did, would you act differently? It shows who you really are. You don't respect the man, you only respect his status." Those words made the chef lower his head. James continued, "Your actions are not a mistake, they are a choice. And that choice will now have consequences." He turned to the manager. "As of this moment, these people no longer work here," he said, pointing to the chef, the waitress, the young waiter, and the girl from the front desk. "Their place here is finished." The manager nodded, clearly glad not to be caught in the hot seat. James looked at the rest of the staff again. "Now, listen to me carefully. This restaurant is built on the principles of quality, respect, and hospitality. Any violation of those principles is not just a failure, it's a betrayal. I'm giving you a chance to show that you understand that." The staff nodded, some looking like they were ready to fall through the ground. James turned and headed for the exit, leaving a stunned silence behind him. He had shown that justice had been served, and that arrogance and prejudice always lead to failure. Friends, the story is not just a story. It is a reminder of how important it is to respect every person, regardless of their appearance, status, or profession. Do you think the owner did the right thing? Have there been instances in your life where you have experienced injustice or racism? Share your stories in the comments. We want to hear your voice. Each and every one of you is incredibly important to us. You are our support, our motivation, our audience that helps us create these stories. We appreciate you all, each and every one of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. By doing so, you help our project to grow and spread important topics. We want these stories to become a lesson for everyone. We wish you a wonderful day and only good people around you.